Okay, the next subject is Prop 15. This is an issue that I'm pretty passionate about. I've been actively involved in this for almost 8 years. Prop 15 addresses a huge problem that was created 42 years ago. So to begin with, how many of you voted for Prop 13? This is a rhetorical question. If you want to raise your hands, that's fine, but you don't have to. If you voted for Prop 13, I'm going to guess that you were voting to protect Grandma and Grandpa or your parents, or even looking long-term to make sure that you would be able to afford to stay in your house. Once it was paid off, you would still be able to afford living there. The taxes would not have risen to the point where they replaced your mortgage, which has happened in other states and at other times. That said, when you voted for Prop 13, did you mean to give large companies and large commercial property owners a tax break for all time? In 1978, with the passage of Prop 13, there was great news and there was not so great news. The great news, Neil, could you go back one? Great, just stay there for a minute. The great news is that people were going to be able to buy a home. The valuation of their property would remain pretty much fixed, and the tax property rate could only be 1% of the valuation that they paid. Lurking beneath the surface, the bad news is that we created a monster. And that monster has been steadily chewing away the revenue streams for local communities, local government, and local schools. So moving on, yes, on Prop 15, California Democratic Party has endorsed Prop 13. That's why I'm using their materials, and they've got good stuff. Could you please go to the next? Next slide. Great. Very simply on a very complicated issue, what Prop 15 will do is require that commercial and industrial properties that are worth more than $3 million per landowner be reassessed every 3 years, and then they will be taxed at the reassessed market value. So by assessing commercial and industrial property at market rates, they will be paying taxes commensurate with the valuation of their property. By the way, nearly every other state taxes commercial and industrial property based on market value, not based on mid-70s valuation, which is what Chevron and Disney and others continue to enjoy. One of the games that corporations have played with these rules is they don't sell their property. What they do is they sell the ownership of the corporation or a controlling interest, so that effectively the property has changed hands, but it is not taxed at a new rate. So you literally have Disneyland paying property taxes at 1975 land values. That creates a highly uncompetitive commercial real estate market in California. If a new organization, company, individual goes in to buy property right next door to Disneyland, they're going to pay many, many times the tax rate per square foot that Disneyland does. And by the way, when I say many times, 10, 20, 30, even more in some cases. Next slide, please. What this proposition called Schools and Communities First will do is literally split the tax rolls. So you'll have virtually everything else in the bucket that it's been in since 1978. Commercial and industrial properties valued at greater than $3 million will be a separate tax roll. Those properties will be reassessed every 3 years and their taxes will change accordingly. The impact that this will have, which is exactly equal to the cost that this has had, that we've been paying, is demonstrated on the chart that you see in front of you. So for the region that we're in, it's about $30 billion coming back or staying back in our region. And you can see what the valuations are elsewhere. This proposition will only affect between 10 and 15% of all commercial and industrial property owners, and 10% of the largest commercial property owners will be paying 92% of this lost revenue. Next. Schools and Communities First will invest $12 billion a year in recaptured revenue in public education and local government. So you can see from the chart that the split is 40% that goes to schools. There's a complicated funding formula that controls all of our public school funding in California. It's called LCFF, Local Control Funding Formula. The revenue that is collected, the 40% will go into that pot. There's a segregated educational funding fund itself. It does not go into general revenues. And that will be distributed according to LCFF. When it gets to the local district area level, it's further influenced by something called a local control accountability plan, which by law requires input on an annual basis from all the key stakeholders. That includes the community, parents, presumably students, but that doesn't really happen, teachers and administration. The other 60% stays in our local government agencies. So let me stop here for a second to repeat. This recaptures $12 billion. It's captured through the county assessor's offices. So the revenue is going to the county. The 40% for public schools is put into the educational fund and distributed according to law in California. The other 60% stays local and will be distributed roughly the same way that funding is currently distributed throughout our government agencies, cities, and the county of Nevada. I've only seen a couple of actual estimates, but for example, Grass Valley School District just by itself would see an increase of about $700,000 a year in funding. In the time of COVID, providing additional revenues both to schools and to local governments is absolutely vital. My wife happens to be the mayor of Nevada City. She is worried about whether or not Nevada City can maintain its charter, whether they can manage their finances well enough, bring in enough revenue, given the declines in tax revenue, to stay solvent. So again, funding for local government agencies that provide all of the key services that we experience every day, the quality of our roads, water, sewer, streets, to say nothing of all of the things on our list, those are going to be affected favorably by this measure. Okay, next. Schools and Community First protects all residential property. If it's used to live in, it's protected. It doesn't matter if you own or rent, that property is exempt. In fact, there's a provision in the bill that in the case of a mixed property, think of an apartment building with stores on the bottom, for example. If 75% or more is residential, the entire property is exempt from this provision, from this split roll. If it's less than 75%, only the commercial portion would be reassessed every 3 years, and that only if it's worth more than $3 million. Next. Schools and Communities First also protects all agricultural property. Agricultural property in this case is defined as any land that's used to produce agricultural commodities. There's an additional feature of this ballot measure that provides a tax cut for small businesses and small farms. The way that that works is that there's, in addition to real property, which is land, there's taxes on personal business property. So think of all the contractors here in Nevada County who own, maybe they own a lot of equipment, scaffolding, a shed, their toolboxes. I mean, they often own thousands of dollars worth of tools, sometimes much more than that. All personal business property would be exempt from taxation up to $500,000, so $500,000. That will provide essentially a tax cut for small businesses. In fact, it's heralded as the biggest tax incentive for small businesses in a generation. If you think again of COVID, not only are local governments getting slammed, not only are a lot of workers being slammed, but small businesses are also being slammed. So providing them with a tax cut at this point is a really good idea. It will cost hundreds of millions of dollars going directly to small businesses. That's more than made up for by the small percentage of large property, commercial and industrial property owners who will have to pay more. Next. I actually just talked about this. The personal business tax is otherwise known as fixtures and equipment. So for farmers, movable irrigation systems, tractors; for most businesses, office supplies, file cabinets, furniture, all of that stuff. Anything that isn't bolted to the walls is considered personal business property. Computers, computer systems. In addition, for businesses that own their property, are based in California, and have 50 employees or less, they stay on the existing roll. They do not become part of the split roll. That will be of great benefit to the small farms. There's a point to be made here. You remember that I said the 92% are paid by of the revenue will come from 10% of the corporations. More than half of small business, more than half of businesses, period, in California are home-based. So they're all exempt from this. The vast majority of people, of businesses who rent space or own space, the valuation doesn't reach $3 million, so they're exempt. Even large corporations will have the increase in their taxes somewhat mitigated by that $500,000 exemption for all fixtures and equipment. With this, remember that Prop 13 said that your tax rate can only be a maximum of 1% of your value, of your property's value. At that rate, California commercial property even when reassessed every 3 years, will still be a lower rate than what New York and Texas and most other states charge for commercial property taxes. Next. Really key to this is the local control. The money is collected at the county level. For us, that's very local. It's distributed primarily at the local level to the 60% for government agencies, cities, counties, fire districts, that kind of thing. And the other 40% goes into the state fund, which is distributed according to law. If you think about the things that threaten our way of life here in Nevada County, think risk of fire. These local funds will help to pay for improvements in our fire readiness, upgrades to the local roads, not the highways that Caltrans take care of, but other roads. The way that the specifics of how they're distributed will be up to the governing agency, Board of Supervisors or the fire district or whatever, but it will be a boon to us here in Nevada County, and it will help our local agencies and cities stay solvent. The other big risk that is obvious right now is COVID, and the risk that poses is to small businesses. This includes that tax incentive for small businesses. Next. You can go to the next slide, Neil. Many of us voted for Prop 30 in 2012. That was income tax that was short-lived and then it got extended. But one of the features of that was that there would be annual accountability. This is something like that. The measure specifically calls for widely available reporting that is easy to understand by the general public. So people will be able to find out readily what monies are brought in and how the money has gotten spent. Once this is passed in November, there will be a property tax task force created immediately. It will have 2 years to come up with a complete implementation plan. That means that the actual implementation will occur in 22-23 and actually goes as long as 5 or 6 years, depending on some of the specific kind of properties. The properties that will be most immediately affected are the big corporations that own lots of land in California, like Chevron. Think of the oil refineries when you drive down to San Francisco, Disneyland, I keep mentioning that one, and other big corporations that have owned their land for 50 years and have been paying property tax rates based on 50 years ago. If any of you bought your houses in the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, you're paying property taxes based on the valuation 5 years ago. Why should Disneyland still be paying property tax rates based on literally valuations of 75, 76? That doesn't make sense. So one of the things that this will do is make a much fairer commercial property market. It also encourages commercial property owners not to hold back on making improvements. When you go and pull a permit to do upgrades to your property, that affects your property's valuation and hence your tax rate. It's the same thing with commercial properties. So we've had an incentive for years for commercial property owners to either just sit on empty land or, which forces suburban sprawl, or not to make improvements because it would then affect their tax rates. This will eliminate that and will make a much more fair, kind of even playing field for commercial and industrial properties. Next. If you want to know who's endorsing it, Here are 20. There are nearly another 800 organizations that have endorsed Schools and Communities First, Prop 15. Virtually every organization you've probably ever belonged to or thought about joining, or at least that I've ever thought about joining, heard spoken highly of, has endorsed. This measure is really about people and about us investing in ourselves, people investing in our own communities and our own lives, our neighbors, our children, in the form of local dollars, staying local, contributing to the quality of education for our children, contributing to the infrastructure environment that we live in. And it rectifies the problem that was created 42 years ago and will help to solve. Questions? I imagine there are a lot. I'm not looking at chat. Margie's taking care of that. Are there any questions, Margie?
Well, the questions that have come up primarily are people would like to have copies of the slides, which I think Neil is taking care of here. I do have a question though. What government entity is collecting this money? Is it the county? And then,
Yes.
and then does that mean that, say, Orange County gets all the money from this increase of taxes on Disneyland? And the same is true of the county where the Chevron station is?
If you recall the chart with the map of the state of California, LA gets billions of dollars. Most of Northern California gets about $150 million. The Sacramento region gets about $320 million. So the amount of commercial development in your area will have an impact. But because 40% of it's going to schools, and because that money is distributed according to the current funding formula for public education in California, literally every single school district will receive some of the money. There's a stipulation that I think every child or every full ADA gets $100 or more.
Then what about the other government agencies? Is it going to be up to the county then to decide, say, how much is shared with the city and the special cities and special districts?
Yes, similar to the way commercial property taxes are collected today. Those are still collected at the local level through the county assessor's office and then distributed according to where the taxes were raised and how the local Board of Supervisors and other agencies or other government entities decide to spend the money.
So what is the downside for the general public? Someone else just asked that.
If you own a piece of commercial property that's valued at over roughly $3.5 million, I'm throwing that $500,000 tax incentive on top of there. You're going to see your property taxes increase. You're going to hear, I promise you, you are going to hear ads on television and on the radio that say if this passes, the sky will fall. Every business in California will leave for Texas or Arizona or Utah or Nevada. It's never been true in the past. It's the same argument they've made every time we've talked about any kind of increase in taxes in the past, and it's never happened. And it's not going to happen because California has 40 million people living here. I mean, businesses want to do business in California. People want to go to a market where there's a market, there's a public to buy your goods, right? If you're going to start a business selling something that a retail commodity, do you want to go to Laramie, Wyoming to start it? Or if it's supposed to be a big business, do you want to start it in LA?
Okay, a couple other comments here. People may also think it's a rollback of the entire Prop 13 so that their residents are in danger. And
it is absolutely not that. That's why I tried to emphasize the idea of split rolls. It only applies to commercial and industrial properties valued at, show me your fingers, how many $1 million? $3 million or more.
What about tech companies who have a global market? Would they have an incentive to stay here?
Again, commercial property tax rates in California will still be affected by Prop 13's cap of 1% of valuation. That's still a better rate than a lot of other places in the United States, including Texas and New York. So yes.
So what, actually, from what you said before, all the other states have a larger taxes than these guys are paying here anyway. So there might not be a better deal somewhere else, is kind of what you're saying.
Well, California real estate is fairly high priced. I assume that big businesses are located here because there are advantages to them to be located here. But make no mistake about it, Apple has major corporate headquarters in any number of other places around the country and in the United States. It's not just there in that little Cupertino Bay, but they still keep their world headquarters in Cupertino. There's another point that I'd like to make. People have asked, well, doesn't that mean that commercial property rents are going to go up? The answer is that rents are really controlled by the market, not by somebody's tax rate. So if Disney has to pay current market rates, they're still getting a better deal than they're going to get in a lot of places. I mean, Anaheim is their flagship property. I really don't see them just packing up and leaving. And besides that, when you went and bought tickets to take your kids to Disneyland, did they look at your driver's license and go, oh, California resident, right, we're going to give you a 50% discount?
Mm-mm.
Didn't happen to me. I mean, Disneyland does and will continue to charge what the market will bear. I'm astounded at what they charge, but they do it because they can get it, right? The market is the driving force for rents, is my point.
So another question was that the income, something flashed over the question. The total tax burden for corporation income and property tax is reputed to be pretty high already. Does that figure into the formula here on this?
No, this strictly addresses property tax rates on commercial and industrial properties worth more than $3 million. It doesn't affect the corporate income tax rate. I've seen any number of comparisons comparing California to other states. It's very easy to make California look like it's one of the highest tax states, but only if you delete some things. So if you include everything, typically California comes in somewhere between the 18th and the 30th in the nation. So it's maybe slightly more than the median, but it's not the highest tax state in the union. But I want to say something. Even if it was, is big business going to ignore a market with 40 million people in it?
Probably not.
I mean, they're not. They'll find a way to do business in California. They just won't be skating on taxes that honestly they should have been paying all along. We didn't do an actual poll, we could have, but I doubt if there was a single person here that in 1978 willingly or knowingly voted for large commercial property owners to have fixed valuations in perpetuity and pay taxes on that basis. The average home turns over something like every 5 or 8 years. That's one thing. 85 to something like 88% of commercial properties in California are not going to be affected by this. Most commercial properties are already paying close to market value, either because the property changed hands maybe in 2006 when property values were also high, or maybe fairly recently, or they pulled permits to make improvements and that affected their valuation. So again, 92% of the revenue produced by this measure will be coming from 10% of the big property owners in California. And let me just say, I don't feel bad to have Disneyland or Chevron pay some more in commercial property tax rates, not rates. Have their taxes paid on a market valuation every 3 years.
So there were a number of questions about these slides. So Peter or Neil, do you want to tell us how people could get a copy?
I will check with the Schools and Communities First campaign and find out if I can share these slides. They are copyrighted by the campaign. I used their materials because the CDP has endorsed Proposition 15. I suspect it's not going to be a problem. There are plenty of other materials that I can freely send because I've already been given permission to do that. There are also speakers trainings. I've done several of them, which is why I'm presenting this. And those materials that are all materials that can be shared. So if people email me or get to me through Neil or Marty, I will do my best to get you some of this information.
Great.
Are there any other questions?
No, I don't see any more.
Okay.